of society wherein we still buy the same bar of soap for $4. So I ask the question, is this budget for poor? Madam Speaker, government has also labeled this budget as turning promises into deeds. And to be able to do this, they have a massive revenue projection of $3.1 billion to fund the total expenditure of $3.3 billion and with a deficit of $203.9 million. And who raises the revenue? Yes, it is us, people of Fiji, the taxpayers. Rich or poor, employed or unemployed, we all pay taxes to the government. And we must remember, it is the common tax that we all pay is the VAT, and that does not differentiate between poor or rich. And Madam Speaker, the corporate and personal tax collected by government from those earning $15,000 and above was $397.2 million in 2006 and is projected to be $582.5 million in 2015, an increase of 47% over the last 9 years. Keeping in mind, the 47% is what the big corporation or businesses contributing taxes with all paid employee income tax. And now, Madam Speaker, let us look at what the ordinary people pay in terms of VAT for all goods and services that we purchase. Collected in 2006 was $298.1 million, and in 2015, a projection of $605.4 million, which is an increase of $307.3 million, or 110% increase. So, Madam Speaker, while the freebies might cost government about $60 million, the government will take from you, from all of us, $784 million in VAT and in duty. So we ask, who is really paying for the freebies? Io, okenda na leo ni badua.
Point of order, if you restrict your presentation in English.
Furthermore, Madam Speaker, what will the revenue from the sales of government assets like FEA, Airports Fiji Limited, Fiji Ports will be used for? Will it fund this 2015 budget? Or will it pay off loans and debts? And as such, Madam Speaker, turning promises into deeds is sounding more like turning promises into debts. Madam Speaker, I shadow the Public Service Commission, the Ministry of Women and Children and Poverty Alleviation, and if I have time, I may add some comments on infrastructure and education. Madam Speaker, the Public Service Commission has a budget of $43.1 million. But we must note that in this budget estimate, which normally contains the list of all employees in the civil service, whether they are established or unestablished, are usually contained in this estimate. But for 2015, I note that they are not there. So I ask the question, Madam Speaker, how can the government accurately allocate funds for salaries and wages if they don't know the number of employees? And on the same note, Madam Speaker, I request that the listing be made available to us before further debate on the estimate is undertaken. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister for Finance also outlined his dream in transforming the civil service as captured in his budget address, and I quote, "A centerpiece of this budget is the commencement of a major overhaul of the government's principal instrument of service delivery, the civil service. Additionally, the Honorable Minister highlighted the following as part of the reform program, and which includes upskilling of civil servants, improving the system and processes with the leverage of latest technology, reward and incentive-based performance review system, and so on and so forth, so that the civil service becomes very competitive with the private sector by offering not only attractive jobs, but also long-term job security. In this regard, Madam Speaker, I applaud these reform initiatives on behalf of all the civil servants. But unfortunately, I don't know how this reform will be undertaken, because I note, and with great concern, that there is no specific allocation for the civil service reforms under the PSC estimates. But there's only 500,000 under head 50, sec 1, with accompanying narration that says, and I quote, that development assistance will be provided by the World Bank. Madam Speaker, if you take time and look in this book, which says turning promises into deeds, and I read about the World Bank to reform the civil service, and I quote the last sentence, an allocation of 500,000 has been set aside in the 2015 budget for this exercise, and it's titled World Bank Review of the Civil Service. But there is no commitment in here by the World Bank in cash grant or in kind to reaffirm to us that the reform will be undertaken by the World Bank. So indeed, turning promises into deeds, I'm worried on behalf of the civil service, because I don't know. These promises will be turned into deeds or not. Madam Speaker, how can the civil service reform be undertaken with only $500,000? These are the questions that the Minister, the Honorable Minister for Finance, needs to answer to. What is the total budget needed for the reform, and where is the money coming from? How much is the World Bank providing? Because there is no commitment, as I've already said, in the estimate. And Madam Speaker, if there is to be any real commitment on the civil service reform that has been announced by the Honorable Minister for Finance, we hope to see a reform plan which should have clear, specific, measurable targets with corresponding budgetary allocation and timelines in place. And if it's available, may I ask the Honorable Minister for a copy. Therefore, Madam Speaker, although the Honorable Minister for Finance had said in his budget address about civil service reform, it is rather misleading, because he has not provided the necessary resources. For example, under head 50, an allocation of 28.6 million has been earmarked for police force job evaluation exercise. That's what we want to see for the civil service reform. But that's not appearing on the budget estimate. We want to see what are the specific amounts and what are the specific activities that will be undertaken under the civil service reform program. Madam Speaker, the civil service reform, as alluded to by the Honorable Minister, portrays a clear picture that this budget, turning promises into deeds, only looks good on words and lacks the numbers or estimates to be able to support it. So we ask, where is the money? Having said that, Madam Speaker, if indeed the Honorable Minister is serious and sincere about the reforms, then I suggest he makes a start by taking appropriate actions on the following.
should be reformed.
For example, 1, review the compulsory retirement age from 55 years to 60 years. Bearing in mind the selective application of the 55 years retirement age, when right now some of those that are well beyond 60 years are still in the service. Madam Speaker, I firmly believe that civil servants or other employees for that matter are too young to retire at 55 years. It is simply a waste of investment on human resource development. And Madam Speaker, on a lighter note, we are all doing quite well in this August House along those lines. Secondly, the Honourable Minister can address the demilitarization of the civil service. And at the same time, may I ask the Honourable Minister for Finance if the civil service reform also includes all those ministries and departments and agencies as listed in the estimates. Madam Speaker, may I now look at the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 1, and I quote, "The wise woman builds up her house, and the unwise woman tears it down with her own hands." And Madam Speaker, I always believe that the status of any family, any village, any country for that matter, is the reflection of the spirituality of its women. Madam Speaker, the total budget of the ministry is 44.8 million. The Department of Women has been allocated 3.3 million, which is only 7% of that budget allocation. Children, 18%, and poverty alleviation, 75%. Madam Speaker, at the beginning of my address, I had mentioned that actual budgetary allocation reflects the government's focus or mandate. So with the kind of allocation I've just mentioned speaks volumes on how this government views the women of Fiji, who make up almost 50% of the total population, and yet only given 3.3 million for the development and empowerment of the women in Fiji. That is our grandmothers, the mothers, the wives and daughters of Fiji. Is this the value we place on them as reflected in this national budget? And Madam Speaker, I hear from the other side that this budget is the mother of all budget. Why mother, I ask?
We have four mothers on our side, we have only one.
So in the very same budget, the Honourable Minister is only allocating 3.3 million for all mothers and women in Fiji. So how can you call it?
Members, you are affecting the time given to the Honourable Speaker by these measures, because that affects.
So how can you call it mother of all budget and don't have the mind and heart to allocate an appropriate amount like 16 million towards the well-being of our mothers and the future mothers of Fiji? In this regard, Madam Speaker, I can hear the government's ringtone of turning promises into deeds sounding very hollow. And I take this opportunity to urge government to seriously review those ministries with huge allocations like health, education, infrastructure, and make violence to the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. Madam Speaker, from a socio-economic perspective, let us briefly compare the ministry's budget to that of the disciplined forces, the military and the police. The ministry has a budget, Ministry of Women, Social Welfare, Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation has a budget of 44.8 million, and of that only 3.3 million is for the women. The military has a 103.3 million plus another 52.8 million under peacekeeping, separate budgetary heads, giving it a total of 156.1 million. The police, 120.5 million. Madam Speaker, analyzing this type of budgetary distribution, we can confidently say that indeed the government's mandate and priority gravitates towards military as compared to the police, to the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. In this regard, Madam Speaker, we ask, how does the government see fit to allocate 156.1 million to the military? And we ask the question, is Fiji under threat? And if so, from what, from where, from who, and why? Why that big amount of budget to the military? I urge this government, Madam Speaker, who prides itself in being the first, to prove itself once again and be the first to transfer at least 16 million from the military budget to boost the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation for the development, empowerment of women, elimination of violence against women and children, and poverty alleviation. Madam Speaker, let us move on to infrastructure. Let me highlight that Water Authority for Fiji has 239.2 million, Fiji Road 638 million. This is a huge allocation for any 1 year, particularly so when it's held under requisition or under R under the Ministry of Finance. Release of funds under R in the Ministry of Finance is a time-consuming process. So which means, in such cases, it questions transparency, accountability, and good governance as a whole. And sometimes we can say that funds tied up under requisition is an unseen government strategy of intentional delay to release funds so as to cover up problematic cash flow and make the budget look good. Madam Speaker, since time is catching up, let me just wrap up with poverty alleviation and ask the government, is this budget really going to help the poor, the voiceless, and the vulnerable? Or is it going to benefit the rich? I didn't say that, they said it. Madam Speaker, the people of Fiji know and understand that without our taxes, there's no development. So I'm urging this government to reduce the common tax of VAT to at least 4%, so that the poor can really benefit from this budget. To conclude, Madam Speaker, even though I have expressed reservation on the budget, I do not support it. But nevertheless, I take this opportunity to wish the government well in their pursuit of this 2015 budget, and to wish the government well in implementing the 2015 budget for the betterment of all the people in Fiji. And I repeat, may I repeat, for the betterment of all people in Fiji.